But let's start with Kentucky Gonzaga. Number 4 versus number 2. The Gonzaga Bulldogs beat the Kentucky Wildcats by 16. I believe the final score was 88-72. This was a game that more than anything for me was about Kentucky losing it and Kentucky still experimenting with what it does well. I think that when I watch Kentucky right now, they just have no idea what they do well and what their best lineups are and what works best functionally for this team. And there's another issue that I want to talk about in a minute here that I think is also a significant problem with them. But more than anything, I think they just don't know who their best players are, who their best lineups are. I think they're really still hunting in a big way because this team is just a little bit deeper maybe than what Cal has had, other than like the platoon year where they just sub 5 guys in and sub 5 guys out. I don't know what to make of this. Do you?
I don't think I know what to make of it, but I'm learning what to kind of steer away from, and seeing Cal kind of experiment with some lineups tonight in different ways to try to get his players involved. I think he's starting to find a couple of areas that he can run with a little bit further. The biggest issue that I'm finding, and you talked about this, Sam, is having 3 non-shooters on the floor. When Kentucky does that, their offense is just way too stagnant. It's so easy to clog up the lane, and that takes away their ultimately best player in Oscar Tshiebwe from having a lot of space to operate down low. That when Tshiebwe, Sahvir Wheeler, and particularly Damian Collins are all on the floor together, there's just not enough floor spacing in order to make that happen. And what we're seeing now is that Cal has enough guys who can shoot the basketball that you don't have to construct a lineup that works that way. You just don't have to, because CJ Frederick can shoot. Reeves can shoot it. Jacob Toppin looks very comfortable. He had a few possessions where he took over in that second half with his one dribble pull up in the mid-range area. If there's spacing and these guys are going to be allowed to have the green light, Kentucky's offense is going to be fine. But when you have moments with a bunch of shooting and then moments where there's no shooting at all, you're going to experience too many offensive lulls that you just can't keep up with really good offensive teams like Gonzaga. And that's where they dug themselves a hole that unfortunately they couldn't get out of.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the defense because I think the defense is a real concern for Kentucky right now. But yeah, offensively, like it's just these lineup constructions. Like you're running out like Oscar, Damian Collins, Sahvir Wheeler lineups, and it's just like these teams have no chance to score, despite the fact that Oscar and Sahvir theoretically are 2 of their better players on the team, especially Oscar. The thing that really stood out for me in the second half was the way that this team operated when Sahvir Wheeler was off the court. When they let Cason Wallace have the ball and just kind of rock, it was much easier to find space on the interior. It was much easier to get space in the mid-range. It was just a much more well-functioning offense in a substantial way in this particular game. And it's frustrating because on some level, like I guess I knew not to expect Kentucky to run a bunch of like, ball screen offense and go, 1-5 high ball screen surrounded by like, Jacob Toppin in the corner and CJ Frederick running like an action to fly up to the wing. And then, Austin or Antonio Reeves, like on the other wing waiting to shoot. I should have known not to expect that, but that's the way that you beat this Gonzaga team defensively. Tennessee and now Texas have shown that this is how you beat them. You space them out. You make Drew Timmy guard in space. Timmy has improved defensively, but because he has such an offensive load and is so important to this team, especially right now with how their guards are playing, and that's not very good. Let's be clear about that. It is so important for Timmy to stay out of foul trouble that sometimes he has to kind of like, make a business decision to not potentially put himself in position for a foul. And then that makes it a bit easier to score on them. Kentucky just never really got them in space. Like it was just frustrating. It was like The second half, they did a little bit better of a job of it, but then they had guys coming in and out of the lineup due to foul trouble, because Gonzaga, by the way, did a great job of getting Oscar Tshiebwe in space and forcing him to guard Drew Timmy when he was already going downhill. Sahvir Wheeler took himself off the court. He just made some really poor decisions fouling defensively at the point of attack. But like, it's just, this Kentucky team works so much better, especially if you're not going to run real ball screen offense, when Cason Wallace is running the show, I think. Because Cason Wallace, CJ Frederick, Antonio Reeves, Jacob Toppin, with Oscar hopefully out there. At times tonight, it was because of Oscar's foul trouble, was not Oscar at the 5. It was Onyensu. It was Lance Ware.
Lance Ware minutes,
yeah. So I just, it's hard. It's hard because, like, also they missed open shots tonight. They just missed a bunch of open shots. Like, Antonio Reeves missed like 4 or 5 wide open threes, and you would expect him to make those shots. So, like, part of it is shooting variance. Part of it is not playing to a team's weaknesses. Part of it is, I don't know, like, apparently, like, Oscar and Cal are saying after the game that, like, the team isn't executing the plays that Cal is calling. Okay.
Like, yeah, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack with it all. And I think the important part is understanding that the team isn't necessarily better when Cason is playing kind of the de facto point guard, because Wallace is so good at running the show. It's just about how damaging it is to have, when you're trying to have Oscar Tshiebwe be your number one option. Sahvir Wheeler out there, complete negative in terms of floor spacing in that regard. It takes one other shooter off the floor, like Wallace, Tshiebwe, and a bunch of shooters around them is probably your pathway forward to a good offense. And anytime you have Cason Wallace at the point of attack defensively, you have a shot to be disruptive enough that you're not going to be a terrible defense. Like, I think Kentucky definitely has some things that they need to sort through on that end of the floor. But Wallace in his own is worth a few possessions of really smart play, shooting passing lanes, just picking up ball pressure enough that, like, to me, that's at least in closing time of close games, that's the lineup that they have to have on there.
So Kentucky plays North Florida and Bellarmine over the course of the next week, basically. They play Bellarmine on Tuesday, the November 29th, it looks like. So they have a couple games here where, if I was them, I would be really giving Cason a real shot to run the show here in these next 2 games. I would be really seeing what you've got here. You have a chance to kind of work through some things offensively over the next 2 days that I think will be really beneficial for them. Here's the bigger problem for them. Oscar Tshiebwe is a sieve right now defensively in space. And that, I think, is a testament not to his skill, because I think that you saw against Michigan State, I thought he played one of his better defensive games, because Michigan State doesn't really have anyone that, like, can put him in space and cause him a bunch of issues. Like, they were playing a true center like Matty Sissoko, and they were playing guards that, like, aren't these, explosive guards who can really cause him issues. He had so many issues in space tonight. He was really struggling to move. He was just not able to drop his hips. He didn't have any hip flexibility. Honestly, I think he looks a little bit heavier than he did last season, which, again, is probably a testament to the fact that his conditioning isn't right and he hasn't been playing with them. It's not like a comment on Oscar Tshiebwe's work ethic or anything. It's just that he's been hurt and he had that surgery on his knee or whatever it was. And that's going to take a little bit of time to come back from. But right now, like he really hindered them defensively in this game against Drew Timmy. Timmy just absolutely wrecked them in space, getting downhill, running short roll ball screen actions, running trailer actions where they'd get him the ball going downhill. It's hard to make that work, I think, it's hard to make their defense work when Oscar can't be the guy cleaning up, because they also have guys like Reeves and Frederick who are not very good defenders right now either. And Reeves particularly, I think, is struggling with some attention to detail things.
Well, and it's not like they're bringing another rim protector off the bench if Tshiebwe has to sit for some of those minutes. Like in the times when Tshiebwe sat due to foul trouble, Timmy was able to get to the rim at will and was absolutely cooking guys, both in that semi-transition kind of trailer spot and one-on-one in the post. He had those beautiful like double spin move that he was doing like a figure skater where he got to the up and under with his left hand. The credit does go to Gonzaga in some regard for this is what they do to teams. They have athletic big men. They run a bunch of ball screens and handoffs on the perimeter and move the ball around pretty quickly and then find ways to attack downhill in space. And both Timmy and Anton Watson are kind of athletic enough or good enough off the bounce to be able to go at bigs who are stiffer in that regard. And that's how they always find ways to attack. Timmy is just so smart at knowing when to have keepers on fake handoffs, when to cut angles and be able to get himself a little bit closer to the basket. He's so good at turning his drives into post-ups when he has an advantage and being really patient with them. And then I thought Gonzaga did a nice job all night on post-up feeds for Timmy, getting him the ball in the middle of the floor where Kentucky couldn't necessarily send help or double team, so that it was his opportunity to play one-on-one. Like I know Kentucky's defense is a mess, but I want to give Gonzaga some credit for how they were able to pinpoint and attack that in ways that really gave Kentucky just no chance to make an answer.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Like Gonzaga is an incredibly smart offensive team, right? They always have been under Mark Few. Mark Few, I think, is like a genius when it comes to pinpointing matchups, point blank. Like tonight, Kentucky started to press them a little bit. Gonzaga's guards have not been great dealing with ball pressure so far this year. I think they didn't do great dealing with ball pressure at times in this game. Gonzaga had, I believe, 18 turnovers, looking at the number now in this game. 5 of those were Timmy. 5 of those were Strawther, I'm sorry, and 4 of them were Timmy. But yeah. I think a lot of the time it's because the guards aren't super comfortable. So those guys feel like they have to like really overexert themselves to really make things happen. So what Few did then was he had guys like Drew Timmy bring the ball up, or late in the game, he had Anton Watson bring the ball up. And it's not like Anton Watson is like some significant offensive player. He's mostly out there because he's an awesome defensive player for Gonzaga. But he does have real ball skills and he can bring the ball up the court. And Gonzaga took real advantage of that, especially once Kentucky made what I thought was a smart defensive adjustment in moving Jacob Toppin over to guard Drew Timmy and letting the 5-man be the help guy. Because if you notice, then Timmy adjusted by stopping his drives and playing more away from the basket as a playmaker who was trying to make things happen away from the rim. And if you can get Timmy away from the rim, it's ultimately a win for you. Like Kentucky, I think, did pretty well guarding those Timmy passing playmaking actions. For instance, like he had the phenomenal like over the head pass to a cutting, it's right, Malachi Smith.
I think so. Yeah.
They did pretty well guarding that. Smith missed the layup, but the problem was that Onyensu didn't get a body on Anton Watson, and Watson just went up for the tip dunk. So it was execution stuff for Kentucky tonight. It was attention to detail, like going under a ball screen on Rasheer Bolton with 2 minutes left in the game. He's a 45% 3-point shooter. What in the world are you doing? Like it's attention to detail stuff. It's them still figuring out who they are. There's so much wrong with Kentucky right now. It feels like I still don't really want to give up on them though, because I buy the talent. I just think that right now there are a lot of issues that Kentucky is going to have to figure out in the meantime. And it could look kind of ugly through the first month and a half of the season, but this team is immensely talented. Like I buy them long-term, even pointing out all of these issues.
It's hard to give up on a team that has this much experience and this much depth in November. Like you're not going to get me to do it. I think that there's a lot that they have to figure out, like you said, but certainly too early to hit that bright red light panic button, time to jump off the wagon. Like, no, there's still time. There is a lot to figure out here. Last thing I'll say on Gonzaga real quickly, Julian Strawther dribbling the ball way too much.
Yeah.
He's got to play a simple game. I don't know if he's trying to show that he can do more than be a catch and shoot guy, or if this is just kind of a necessity, like you said, of cleaning up for some of Gonzaga's guards that aren't ready for handling pressure or a ton of the role that they're asked to do right now.
I think it's more that
he's
for
doing
what
too
it's
much.
worth. Yeah. I think it's more that for what it's worth. I think they're really relying on Rasheer Bolton, who's more of like a pure two guard. And then Strawther, who's like a 3, sometimes like he's even best at the 4 for Gonzaga. They're really relying on them to make things happen on offense. What I will say about Julian Strawther tonight, he played a super fucking tough brand of basketball. He had 14 rebounds. I thought he was pretty good defensively. He was just really, really effective across the board tonight for Gonzaga. I thought he did a great job. He's good as a cutter, obviously made a few 3-pointers in this game, got to the foul line. He played a physical brand of basketball in a way that he doesn't always, I'm not saying that this is like a substantial problem for him, but in a way that he doesn't always play. He went above and beyond tonight and was very aggressive and was very good.
Yeah, I co-sign that one there. I think he's also going to be the NBA player eventually who we look at when he first checks into NBA minutes and says, oh, he's a lot taller and bigger than I thought he was. Like he's a pretty big dude.
Yeah, he's a big guy. The last thing that's worth talking about here is Cason Wallace. Cason Wallace was awesome. Cason Wallace was awesome. Let's just take a minute here and talk about the prospects. Cason Wallace went 5 for 9 from the field, 2 of 3 from 3, had 4 steals, was a pest defensively all night, had 14 points, had 2 assists. Like everything I see from Cason Wallace makes me think he is a top 15 pick. I've seen no real flags yet from him that make me worry.
So smart defensively, always positionally sound. When he does gamble, he wins those gambles, and he knows the right times to do it and not to do it. He's a competitor in every single way. There's enough versatility in his offensive bag in terms of shot making from the perimeter. He's got a really nice floater when he's driving to his right hand. I like a lot of the pieces to his game, and he just seems like that guy that's not really gonna strike out at all, because at the very least, what you're gonna get out of him, we saw in one stretch tonight, is a really great sequence. Nolan Hickman's driving to the basket, and Cason just takes the ball, like rips it right out of his hands, runs and goes the other direction and throws a lob for an alley-oop. Like the ability that he has to just turn defense into offense, make special plays, and be a winner at any point that he's on the floor during the 40 minutes there. He's a lottery talent. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on Cason. Chris Livingston does not look like a 2023 draft prospect at this point. Let's call that what that is. Strawther, I think this was one of his better games. I think that this is one that he'll point to on his tape reel and say that this was a good one for him. And then, like, we've talked about Drew Timmy in the way that he impacted Kentucky's defense more than anything. He's just terrific. Like, even just little stuff. Like, I think it was Malachi Smith came down the paint for his only bucket of the game tonight and was driving left. Timmy just completely sealed off his man at the basket for an easy bucket in the first. It was just, he is terrific. He does everything, all of the small stuff you need. I think that his defense needs to get better. He knows that his defense needs to get better. You know, there are some effort things that he gets frustrated about. I think Gonzaga in general is still working through some defensive issues. They had some like substantial communication breakdowns tonight, but this is early season college basketball. And when you have Drew Timmy, who's been a 4-year player that is maybe the best player in college basketball, it's an enormous marginal advantage. And Gonzaga and Drew Timmy will continue to be one of the best teams in the country this year because of it.
Yeah, I mean, Kentucky did not show up for the first 10 to 12 minutes of that game. Just wasn't organized in any type of sense. Their offense wasn't a collective unit at all. Gonzaga blitzed them out of the start. But the final 25 to 30, like, we got a pretty good matchup. We got Timmy versus Oscar, which is something college basketball fans have been clamoring for a long time, and was great to see it. Fun game. And I think the biggest thing for me is college basketball is fun in that type of environment. And Drew
Yeah.
Timmy is the exact type of guy that makes it fun. A personality, a polished player, somebody who continues to return to school and can lead his team to victory in a somewhat dominant fashion.